Hello. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Pip. That was fab. Hello, everybody. I've not been very well this week, so I am just going to apologise if I start coughing in the middle. I tried to get out while Pip was talking, so also sorry if you couldn't hear him. I've also got an apology to Roger. Roger, I was out with the youth last week, so I didn't hear your talk, and I've not watched it since. So I'm really sorry if I'm repeating your messages. But if I am, I think that's a good sign, because it shows that there's a message for us, doesn't it? So I'm going to be looking at the story of Esther. I'm going to give you just a brief summary of chapters 1 to 3, and then we're going to look properly at chapter 4. So the story of Esther is set in Persia. It's around 500 BC, which is about 500 years after the story of David. And the Israelites have been exiled, and some of them have returned to Jerusalem, but most of them are still in exile. So the king of Persia at the time is a guy called Xerxes, and at the start of the story, he deposes his wife, Queen Vashti, and he sends her into exile. And he decides it's going to be a good idea to hold a competition to find his new queen. So during this time, there's a Jew in Persia called Mordecai, and he has adopted his cousin Esther because her parents have died. And as part of this process to find the new queen, Esther gets taken into the king's palace. She goes through like a year of rituals and beauty regimes and all sorts. But then when she does actually get to meet the king, she wins his favor, and he decides to make her queen. But through this, she keeps her Jewish heritage a secret. So Mordecai tells her, don't tell the king that you're a Jew. She keeps that a secret during the time. So a little bit later on, the king made a man named Haman one of his most powerful officers. Haman didn't like Mordecai. So Haman essentially said that he's going to get everyone to bow down to him, and Mordecai was like, no, I'm not going to bow down to you. And so as a result of this, Haman made a plan to have Mordecai killed. He was going to sentence him to a death by impaling him on a pole. But not only that, he was then going to kill all the Jewish people as well. So it's not a good time for Esther because she's a Jew, and yet she's a queen. And then this is where we go into Esther chapter 4, which I'm going to be reading from the NLT too, Pip. Good choice. So it goes like this. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went on as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. When Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was in mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and to plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called to me to come for him for 30 days. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Chloe's just messaged me. Thank you so much, Chloe, because that's just interrupted my notes. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for all the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. Mason's now watching too. Hello, Mason. It's really not helping. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all of the Jews and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So it's important to note that Esther is one of the few books in the Bible which doesn't actually have any explicit mention of God. And for me, there's two implications of this. The first one is it's an invitation for us to look for where God is working ourselves. We have to read this story, we have to look into this story and find God's work ourselves. And the second thing, it highlights in our lives that God is working, even if we can't see it or we can't hear it or we can't feel it. He's still there and he's still doing things. It just might not be completely explicit. And so up until this point of the story, there's no real indication of God's direct calling for Esther. And there's no mention of Esther really following God. We know that she's a Jew, but that's all we know. There's no prayers, there's no angels, there's no calling and dreams, there's nothing there at all. We also don't know what Esther's role is as the queen. We know that King Xerxes likes to have wives who are beautiful, and he likes to call them in and invite his friends to look at them. Other than that, we don't know what her job is. We don't know what her role is. He actually exiled his last wife because she refused to show herself off for him, so it doesn't look great for Esther. And at this point, Esther hasn't even been summoned in 30 days, and it's likely that the king has got other partners as well. She's also separated from her only family member, Mordecai. So her husband no longer wants to see her. She's not really got any family around. The people around her don't know she's a Jew, and now all the Jews are going to be killed anyway. So it's easy to imagine that she's not feeling great. She's not feeling particularly fulfilled. She's not feeling particularly called. She's just in a bit of a state. And I think for us as Christians, it can be really easy to feel this sense of unfulfillment ourselves. It's easy to feel like you're in a place where you're just coasting through life. You question what your bigger purpose is. You feel like your role isn't really significant. You might even feel like you're still waiting to find your calling. You don't know what that is. But in the midst of all of this, Esther is suddenly presented with this opportunity. She's the right person in the right place at the right time to be able to do something significant. And what I love is that Mordecai tells her that if she keeps quiet, the Jews will still have their deliverance from somewhere else. So Mordecai knows that God's not going to abandon them. Mordecai knows that God's going to bring them out of it anyway. But what Mordecai also knows is that God has put Esther in this position to do this thing if she's willing to. He's put her there for a reason, and so he encourages her to use her position for God's purposes. And then, thankfully, Mordecai's encouragement works, and Esther sees that it's her job to do something. She goes from being in this place of fear, knowing that she could lose everything, to this place of obedience and willingness. She asks the Jews to fast, and she goes to the king, knowing that she could not only lose her husband, her role, and her position, but she could also lose her life. And she says, if I die, then I die. It's a pretty big thing to go through. So she's willing to sacrifice herself in order to save God's people, which is quite a running theme throughout the Bible. I don't know if you've noticed. Thankfully then, when Esther does go to see King Xerxes, he is pleased to see her. And he asks, what do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom. And then the final few chapters of the book tell us of how Mordecai and Esther create a plan to have the king save the Jews, and God's people are saved. So just going back to that line that Mordecai says, he says, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? And this is what I want you to think about today. Think about the places where God has put you in your life. What roles has he given you? Where do you spend your days? What do you spend your days doing? And that looks completely different for all of us. And it's easy for us to say, oh, I'm just a teacher, or I'm just a parent, or I don't even have a job, or I just work in this thing, and so on. But what happens if you rephrase it and you say, perhaps you were made a for such a time as this? What if you were made a teacher for such a time as this? What if you were made a parent for such a time as this? And how does that sort of shift the way you look at your life and where you are at the moment? And I think we can go one step further than Esther, because Esther sort of just sat back and waited for things to go wrong. She was by no means the image of a perfect follower of God or anything like that. But we can actively seek God's will in everything we do. We can actively ask what his purpose is in our life, no matter what it is we spend our days doing. We can commit ourselves every single day to serving God and to his purpose, no matter what it is we do. So what I want you to do is just ask God, how do you want to use me in this position you've placed me? We know he's got a purpose for each of us, even if it feels like what we do isn't particularly significant. He used the choices and circumstances of Esther, Mordecai, and even Xerxes and Haman, both the good and the bad choices, to fulfill his plan for his people. So if we seek him, we know he's going to use us too. So I'm just going to leave you with this verse from Romans 12, verses 1 to 2, and this is from the Message version. And it says, so here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity in you. So we're going to sing now, Build My Life, and you're welcome to stand and sing, or you are welcome to just sit down and have a reflective time in which you pray and you ask God to speak to you about what Pip and I have brought to you tonight. So thank you, everybody.